At 6:12 a.m., Gladys Bennett's white Range Rover idled crooked on Pier 47, driver's door flung wide to the slate-blue water of Boston Harbor. Her purse lay on the passenger seat with the zipper open, her phone face down on the rubber mat, the ultrasound photo half crumpled under the brake pedal. By 8:30, a microphone forest grew around her husband, tech billionaire Graham Whitfield, as he told the cameras she'd struggled and left in a moment of distress. "She ran," he said, jaw locked. Detective Marisol Vega watched his pupils instead of his words. The GPS log in evidence bag 14 said otherwise. The morning Gladys vanished, fog curled off the harbor like breath on a cold window. In Beacon Hill, the Whitfield brownstone glowed warm, all polished wood and the polite hush of money. Gladys padded past framed magazine covers of her husband, the visionary, the pivot king, the man who outsmarted the market, and carried decaf coffee to a couch that looked expensive and uncomfortable. She was 32, 7 months pregnant, and carrying weight she'd wanted all her life. She was also carrying a silence, the kind that makes you tiptoe in your own home. "Big day," Graham said, descending the stairs in running shoes and a perfect thermal. He kissed her forehead out of habit, not heat. "Board meeting at 9, the foundation gala tonight. You'll come, right?" "I promised Alison I'd help with her classroom supplies," Gladys said. "I'll meet you at the gala." His face tightened the way it did when he was about to call a compromise. Fine. He wasn't cruel. He was curated. She'd fallen in love with the version of him that fixed broken toasters in their first Cambridge apartment. He'd become the man who had a person for the toaster, a person for the person, and an NDA for them both. "I want you there," Graham said. "Optics matter. We're launching the maternal health initiative." Gladys rubbed the edge of the ultrasound photo like a worry stone. "Optics matter more than how I feel." He didn't answer. A driver texted that the car was ready. He left with the soft buzz of expensive efficiency. Gladys stood in the doorway, fingers on her belly. The baby kicked, a small, insistent drum. She told herself the lie she'd been living for months. When the baby comes, he'll soften. When the baby comes, he'll look up from the horizon and see me. The Range Rover's interior smelled like leather and mint gum. A small blue light near the dash blinked. She'd noticed it last week and had asked a mechanic at a Jiffy Lube. The kid had shrugged. Probably dealer junk. She had errands. She had a meeting of her own. Off the books, off the calendar, off the script. At 6:12 a.m., she turned out of Beacon Hill and headed toward the waterfront, where the fog moved like a curtain. By 7:10, Detective Marisol Vega stood by the abandoned SUV with a pen behind her ear and irritation in her bones. The GPS unit showed the car had traveled from the brownstone to Pier 47 without deviations, cleaner than a nurse's hands before a procedure. Too clean. Vega grew up in Hyde Park with 5 brothers and a mother who could smell a lie through a closed door. She'd learned to watch how people left things, a door ajar, a coffee ring, the angle of a chair. She crouched by the brake pedal, lifted the ultrasound photo with tweezers, and looked up at the grey light. "Something's missing," she said. "What?" the rookie asked. "The mess." By 8:30, reporters gathered outside Whitfield Capital headquarters. Graham, in Navy and Consequence, read a statement. He spoke like a CEO managing a market shock, the crisis contained in vowels. He mentioned mental health, unspecified stress, the hope she had simply needed space. He did not say kidnapping. He did not say danger. His legal counsel stood just over his left shoulder like a shadow that charged by the hour. "Gladys is beloved," he said. "We are asking for privacy." Privacy was gone. In Dorchester, Alison Bennett, 3rd-grade teacher, older sister, keeper of the sentimental, clutched her coffee and stared at the TV. She was 2 years older than Gladys and still held the storied family role of person who says what everyone else is thinking. She didn't run, Alison whispered to an empty kitchen. She dialed Gladys, straight to voicemail. She texted, "Pick up, not playing." She drove to Beacon Hill. At the brownstone, the doorman recognized Alison by her stubborn jaw. Inside, the house smelled like lemon oil and the cold scent of money. Alison found the house manager, a kindly woman who looked constantly on the edge of apology. "We haven't seen her," the woman said. "Mr. Whitfield has the police involved." "He has the narrative involved," Alison muttered. She walked to the nursery Gladys had half finished. A rocking chair, a mobile of paper cranes, a crib still in its box, because Graham insisted on a designer brand whose waitlist worked like a velvet rope for bassinets. Alison ran a finger along the chair's arm and felt a splinter. Small, real, human. She sat, let the chair creak, and cried for precisely 30 seconds. Then she stood up and turned into a weapon with sensible shoes. At the precinct, Vega took Alison's statement. "She said she'd meet me at the gala at 7, Alison said. "She had something to do first. She was vague, but she's been volunteering, quietly, at a shelter in Charlestown. Didn't want the foundation involved. She said, 'Real help doesn't survive a photo op.'" Vega nodded. The shelter, Jackson Street Women's Center, sat in a row of townhouses whose paint peeled like tired skin. Vega and Alison drove over. The director, a woman named Tasha, met them on the stoop with arms folded. "Gladys is good people," Tasha said. "Brought diapers and didn't Instagram them." "When did you last see her?" Vega asked. 2 nights ago. Said she was helping someone this morning. A woman named Celine. Bad situation. Husband's a cop over in Winthrop. She wanted to get out early. Gladys planned to drive her to a safe handoff point. "Where?" Tasha hesitated. "Neutral ground. Those big storage units off Route 1. Eden's Gate. The idea is neither party knows the other's shelter." Vega wrote it down. Her phone buzzed with an email from a tech. "GPS pulls done, see attached," and a text from her captain. "Press once a line. Keep it bland." "You think Gladys ran?" Tasha asked. "I think people run to something," Vega said. "Fear, freedom, a myth about themselves. But they always run to something." Alison squeezed her keys. "She was running to a life she chose," she said. "We're going to find her." Vega nodded, already sliding keys into the ignition. "We are." As they pulled onto Route 1, Alison stared out the window at the strip malls and the car lots, and the giant flag whipping itself ragged in the wind. "He's already writing his statement," she said. "He's always writing statements." Vega tapped the steering wheel in time to a thought. "Let him," she said. "We're going to read the road. Eden's Gate." Storage sprawled like a grid of secrets just past a diner that served corned beef hash with a pride bordering on sin. Rows of units, blue doors, numbers stenciled in white. Security cameras blinked up on poles like distant warning stars. The manager, a man who'd lived his life in Red Sox hats, squinted at their badges and scrolled through footage. There, Gladys's white Range Rover rolled past at 5:49 a.m. Another vehicle, black panel van, no markings, turned in 2 minutes later. There was no footage of Gladys or the pregnant silhouette they wanted. A camera at the far end flickered and died, a coin battery failing in a cold morning. "Power hiccup," the manager said. "Any trouble's always when a battery forgets its job." Vega requested the logs, texts to techs, quietly asked for the security system's maintenance vendor. Meanwhile, Alison studied the screen as if she could scrub time with willpower. "Gladys met someone here," she said. "But we don't see her meet anyone," Vega turned to the man. "Do you keep a physical log of after-hours events? Alarms? Sensor trips?" He handed a clipboard, dusty and old school. At 6:02, a motion sensor recorded activity behind Unit B27. Another note, smudged. Camera 4 offline, 5:59:6:12. B27, Allison said. Who's renting it? Ah, the manager said, tapping keys. Merritt Holdings. Vega looked up sharp. Merritt? Like Sloane Merritt? Allison asked, her mouth already thin. Graham's PR czar? The manager shrugged. I just rent rectangles. Vega called it in. Within an hour, detectives had a warrant. B27 held a folded table, 2 office chairs, a blue moving blanket, a box of disposable gloves, a roll of gaffer tape, and the clean absence of fingerprints that meant someone had wiped their shame. Allison held herself still to keep from shaking. He knew, she said. Graham knew. Vega didn't answer. She was looking at a small scuff on the concrete. Black rubber streaks next to a smear of something faintly reddish-brown. She thought of the word people feared to say, when something still might end well. Blood. She bagged a swab. Outside, wind rattled the blue doors. Somewhere in Boston, a press team ran through talking points. Somewhere else, a woman named Celine waited to be picked up and learned what it felt like to be stood up by safety. Vega's phone buzzed. Tech. Car's GPS log shows false zeros. Someone bathed it. But the onboard module, buried in hardwire, that one forgot to lie. I'm pulling the raw now. She texted back. Bless you in very secular ways. Allison stared at the clouds, sliding like grief across the sky. He's going to say this is rogue staff, she said. He's going to say he didn't know. Maybe he didn't, Vega said. Maybe he did. Either way, the road tells the truth. Graham sat in his office, surrounded by glass and view. Boston lay beneath him like a plate he could eat. Sloane Merritt stood by the window and fed him lines about compassion and responsibility, her voice silk on a razor. You need to stabilize the share price, she said. You look worried, but not undone. You look in control, but not cold. I am worried, Graham said, and I'm not in control. Sloane's smile never touched her eyes. It rarely did. She'd clawed her way from a foster home in Worcester to PR director at 29 and chief of communications by 32, a biography web pages called Self-Made, in a tone that guarded her from ever being soft. Vega wants to speak again, Graham said. If she had anything, she'd be in this office with a warrant, Sloane said. We cooperate, we posture, we keep options open. Don't talk about my wife like she's an option, he said, the temper under glass finally tapping. Don't we this? Sloane looked at him long enough to make the silence hot. You want me to be the villain? She asked softly. I can be that for you. But you hired me to protect this house. Don't shatter a window and blame me for the draft. The phone on his desk flashed. Building security. Detective Vega is here. Graham straightened his cuffs the way a man does when he wants to feel like a man. Let her in. Vega entered in a blazer that had seen more weather than his car collection. She placed a clear bag on the table. Inside, a small black slab with leads. That's your wife's secondary GPS, she said. The one connected to the dash isn't factory. This one is. Hardwired to the car's system. It logs whether or not you want it to. I think you paid for the upgraded package. Graham's eyes flicked to Sloane. She looked pleasantly blank, the smile of an expensive weapon in a velvet case. Where did it go? He asked. Pier 47, yes, Vega said. But before that, a detour. Eden's Gate Storage, Unit B27, rented to Merritt Holdings, your holding company for communications and brand. Cameras went off when the car arrived. A van arrived shortly after and left during the blackout. We're checking nearby traffic cameras. We'll find that van. Graham swallowed a small shame he'd been nursing since December. He'd used a private app on Gladys's phone to track her for 3 weeks after a fight about trust. He'd deleted it, after seeing her go nowhere but the obstetrician, her sisters, a bakery, and a church where she lit a candle and cried. He hadn't told anyone, just as he'd never told the world that his father left when he was 9 with the TV and the dog. Unit B27 is a staging area, Vega said. It was wiped. There was trace blood. We don't know whose. If you know where your PR chief keeps a warehouse of shame, now would be a good time to say it. Sloane folded her arms. We rent staging spaces for crisis response, press kits, lighting. We do video statements. Do you do abductions? Allison asked from the doorway. She'd marched past a secretary with a righteousness that looked like a badge. Do you practice those too? Ms. Bennett, Vega said gently. Wait outside. No, Allison said. Say it to my face, Sloane. Say my sister ran. Sloane's eyes were almost kind. Ms. Bennett, she said, I am truly sorry this is happening, but I don't run warehouses of shame. I keep boxes of microphones. Vega slid photos across the table. The blue moving blanket, the gaffer tape, the scuff on concrete. Sloane's expression flickered, an emotion trying to get out of a locked room. Who else has access? Vega asked. Sloane hesitated. Our security vendor. Name, Black Line Protective, Head of Ops, Evan Carroll, Vega typed. The name came back with a face. Middle-aged, boxer's nose, decorated veteran, now a private contractor who believed in God, guns, and clean resolutions. Graham rubbed his thumb on the edge of the desk. Why would anyone? Because someone gave them a reason, Vega said. Money, loyalty, a belief baked into them like bread. We're going to find the van, Mr. Whitfield. And if it leads to a lake house you forgot you owned, we'll be there. Sloane didn't move. You're insinuating. I'm doing my job, Vega said, and her voice dropped a register. And my job is not optics. A linen blind made the world look like old film. Gladys woke to it, and to the cool burn of something medical pricking her arm. She was on a couch, ankle-taped, head thick. She sat up too quickly, and the room tilted. Easy, someone said. A man with a boxer's nose, hands like careful tools, grey t-shirt, dog tags hidden under cotton. You twisted your ankle. Gladys tried to stand. Pain shot through her like a thrown knife. Who are you? Where am I? A safe place, he said. We're going to keep you calm, get you to sign some papers, clear up a misunderstanding. Then you go home. Where's home? Gladys asked. The one where my husband tells the press I ran, or the one where he says he loves me, but I've become an optic. The man's eyes flicked to a camera lens tucked in a corner. I'm Evan, he said. We're in New Hampshire. There are woods between you and road. Don't hurt yourself trying. Gladys swallowed her rising panic. Her hand went to her belly of its own accord. The baby thumped as if to say that panic was a luxury. You have to let me go, she said, voice steadying, because terror can't help you if it makes you stupid. I'm pregnant. Stress isn't a photo filter. Evan didn't answer. He taped gauze on her arm. He walked to a table where a laptop idled open to a blank document, titled Settlement NDA Confidential. The door opened. Sloane Merritt walked in, wearing a field jacket rich women buy for authenticity. Gladys, Sloane said softly. I'm so glad we found you. Gladys laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. Found? You hired a man to find me between a storage unit and a lake. Sloane's expression didn't break. It never did. Gladys saw it then. Sloane believed what she said, even when she rearranged truth like furniture. You've been under strain, Sloane said. You left early this morning. Graham is frantic. The press is a storm. Sign these. We release a statement together. You go home. We stabilize the company that pays for your charity dreams and all those cute little cranes in the nursery. You think I want your money? Gladys said. I want my life. Sloane's eyes sharpened. Your life is tied to ours, Gladys. If Whitfield Capital stumbles, Thousands of people lose their jobs, their health insurance. You want to be the virtue girl? Protect the herd. Protecting the herd by kidnapping a pregnant woman? Gladys asked. Is that on the branding deck? Sloane's jaw worked, a flicker of something like rage tightening her perfect face. You won't sign? I'll sign the truth, Gladys said. But not your version. Evan looked at Sloane. This isn't what I signed up for, he said. Quiet. Sloane turned to him with a calm designed to humiliate. You signed up to follow orders, she said, and to protect this company. Evan's gaze went to Gladys's stomach. He swallowed. I didn't sign up to hurt a kid. No one is hurting anyone, Sloane said. We're averting harm at scale. Gladys felt the baby roll, a live reminder that scale is a word people use when they've forgotten what one life weighs. She leaned forward. Evan, she said. Do you have a daughter? He flinched. 11. What would you tell her to do if someone asked her to sign something when she was scared and trapped? Silence hung like thunder that decided not to hit. Evan pulled a chair to the door, sat with his forearms on his knees, and didn't look at Sloane. Gladys memorized the shape of the key on his belt. There's the version where you break a window and the summer air saves you. There's the version where you bide time and the calendar turns in your favor. Gladys chose the second. She drank water, breathed, and waited for a mistake. It arrived with the weather. The generator hiccuped when clouds muscled into rain. Evan stood to check it. The camera in the corner blinked and died. Gladys stood, her ankle screaming. She lunged, grabbed the key, jammed it at the doorknob like a prayer. The door opened to pine, rain, and the kind of cold that makes you alive. She ran. Where? Graham asked, staring at a map of New England like a man who'd forgotten its names. Vega stood by the screen with a laser pointer and a patience maligned as stubbornness by men who preferred luck. Traffic cam caught the black van near Amesbury, Vega said. Crossed into New Hampshire. 2 likely routes to lakes with properties registered to Black Line Protective's shell companies. We're here. She tapped a blue oval by Lake Harrow. We go now. Graham's hand shook as he grabbed his coat. Allison watched and filed the shake under human. She wanted to hate him with her whole body and found a sliver of something else lodged under her ribs. Pity or recognition. He was a man trying to unmake the man he'd let the money shape. They drove in a convoy of police SUVs. Rain ran on the windshield like transparent snakes. The radio crackled names and positions. Vega briefed them in clipped phrases. 2 suspects. 1 known, 1 unknown. Pregnant victim. De-escalate. No hero moves. Graham pressed his forehead to the glass and saw trees, streams, lines. Everything a long, dark blur. He remembered December, the fight in the kitchen where Gladys said, I feel invisible in rooms you built. And he said something about board cycles, and she said, You don't have to be the man your father was afraid of becoming. And he laughed, a short, cold thing he wanted to pull back, even as it left him. He had tracked her. He had said sorry. He had bought her a rocking chair. He had not changed the pace of his sentences. Vega's phone buzzed. A deputy on a side road. Footprint in mud. Bare. Small. Vega swore under her breath, flicked the siren, turned. Pines rose like steeples. Lake Harrow appeared without warning. Grey water, dark shore, a cabin crouched like a secret. Positions, Vega said, voice now the click of safety off. They flanked. Vega tapped the front door. Police. Inside. Voices. A chair scraped. The door opened. Evan Carrow held his hands out. She ran into the woods, he said. She's hurt. Bring a medic. On your knees, Vega said. Hands behind your head. He complied like he'd been waiting for an order that absolved him. Sloane came into view, hair damp, eyes bright with fury. This is a misunderstanding, she said. I'm counsel to Whitfield Capital. You're someone else's story now, Vega said. Face the wall. Graham stood in the doorway as deputies cuffed Sloane. She turned to him, the wordless accusation louder than sirens. You let me build this for you, and you abandoned me in it. Where is she? Graham asked, and the fury left his voice, leaving it hollow and honest. Where is my wife? Lake Path, Evan said, running. She's strong. Strong, Allison repeated, as if the word could be a rope. She bolted for the path. Gladys ran 10 minutes and years. Rain drilled her scalp. Mud grabbed her shoes until she became barefoot by accident. She fell twice, once on her knees, once hard on her side. She stood again because she had no theology beyond forward. Footsteps behind her, then voices that weren't chasing but calling her name like it mattered. Gladys! She turned, ready to throw checkbook words like shields. She saw Allison first, hair plastered to her face, eyes fierce and wet. Then she saw Graham behind her, unimportant and huge. Gladys, he said, throat raw. I'm so sorry. Words came to her like hail. She ducked them all. Don't! Not here! Vega caught up, breath steady. Life lived in running. She took Gladys's pulse with a hand that didn't shake. You're okay, Vega said. The baby? Gladys nodded. Active, she said, tears finding their way. Can we leave? Can we please just leave that house behind us? They walked out of the pines like a procession. Vega in front, Allison holding Gladys's arm, Graham behind, carrying the past like a box too heavy and too stupid to have ever bought. Hospitals smell like bleach and hope. Gladys lay in a bed near a window that offered a rectangle of rain. A fetal monitor drew lines that made music in a language you didn't need to speak to feel. A doctor came in with the gentle authority of a person who'd stayed up 2 decades of nights. You're dehydrated and bruised, but your labs are okay, she said. Baby's heart rate is strong. We want to keep you for observation. Gladys closed her eyes and let herself, for once, be someone who was cared for. Graham stood at the foot of the bed and did not approach like a man who had learned a new etiquette. I'll leave if you want, he said. Sit, she said, because dignity wasn't the same as cruelty. He sat like a man who knew he wasn't owed a chair. Allison hovered, protective and loud. I'll stay, she said to Gladys. Kick him out if his apology uses the word optics. Graham swallowed. Gladys, he said. I did not know Sloane planned this. I hired her to shield us from the worst parts of the world. I didn't realize she'd become one. She became what you rewarded, Gladys said. It wasn't spit. It was simple. You liked that she won. You didn't ask how. He nodded, a small, honest thing. Yes, Vega entered with a notepad, her presence somehow both gentle and steel. We'll need statements, she said. Evan? Gladys asked. What will happen to him? He cooperated, Vega said. He'll be charged. He's also willing to testify that Sloane planned the deception, that she framed the narrative about you running, that she hired Black Line for containment if you refused to sign a statement she drafted. Gladys felt sick, a dizziness that wasn't medical. She told me I was protecting the herd. Vega's jaw flexed. I've heard every lie a scared person tells themselves, she said. The savior ones are the most dangerous. Gladys gave her statement. She did not embellish. She did not make herself nobler. She described the storage unit, the van, the lake house, Sloane's jacket, the way Evan's thumb shook when he wrapped gauze on her arm. She included how she'd planned to meet Celine, how she'd felt complicit when Celine texted, "Are you here?" And she could not be. Vega listened like it was a profession and a sacrament. After, Gladys turned to Graham. I was going to help someone, she said. Not to be seen, just to be useful. You are more than useful, he said, breaking. You are the point. Then act like it, Allison said. Graham nodded, the second honest thing. Sloane and Evan will face charges, he said. I'll cooperate fully, and I'll resign. From the company? Gladys asked, surprised at the speed of relief that rolled through her. From the story where I'm the man who can fix everything if you just be quiet, he said. From the idea that my power is worth other people's harm. The doctor returned with a nurse and paperwork. Gladys signed forms that were not traps. Allison fluffed a pillow with a competence earned in classrooms and heartbreak. Vega stood at the window, watching rain stub itself out on the glass. On TV that afternoon, Sloane Merritt's arrest made footage loop. Commentators called it a shocking turn. The market did what markets do, flinched, then recalculated. In a smaller corner of the screen, a crawl ran the weather. Rain tapering by evening. Patchy fog overnight. In the ward, Gladys slept for the first real time in months. Morning cracked open to a calm that felt borrowed. The nurse coiled Gladys's IV, removed the tape with care. The baby's heartbeat sounded like small hooves on a field. Graham looked smaller without a suit jacket. More like the boy who taught her to ride a bike on a dead-end street in Cambridge one summer, when money was a future and not a map. They'd met at a diner, in a booth that smelled like syrup, when he was nobody. She'd loved the way his eyes warmed when he listened. Somewhere along the road to Billionaire, he'd outsourced that. "Why did you track me?" she asked. His head dropped. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid you would leave the life I made before I learned how to be in it with you." "And did the app help?" she asked. "Did it make me more yours?" His laugh was ugly and short. "It made me more ashamed." She let the silence sit between them until it cooled. "My favorite version of you," she said at last, "was the man who fixed a toaster with a butter knife and a YouTube video. My least favorite is the man who fixes feelings with NDAs." He smiled despite himself, a flash of the diner boy. "I miss him, too." A volunteer knocked and peeked in. "Ms. Bennett, there's someone named Celine here. Says she won't leave until she sees you, but also that she's happy to leave if you want." Gladys sat up, surprised heat in her chest. "Send her in." Celine entered like a woman expected to be turned away. She was 30, pretty in a way the world punished, with a bruise fading yellow along her jaw. She carried a plastic grocery bag like a shield. Inside, a pack of diapers, a chocolate bar, a paperback romance with a cracked spine. "I wanted to tell you I'm okay," Celine said quickly. "My cousin picked me up. We went to her place in Malden. My husband, he's suspended. Tasha connected me with legal aid. I'm safe." Gladys swallowed a knot. "I'm sorry I didn't make it." "You almost died trying to get there," Celine said, half laughing in disbelief. "Which, isn't necessary next time." They both cried a little and pretended they weren't. Celine handed her the chocolate like a sacrament. "For later," she said. "Also, don't hate me, but I called the TV station to tell them you didn't run. That someone took you." Gladys blinked. "You did?" Celine shrugged, a gesture part apology, part triumph. "You helped me," she said. "I helped you." Graham watched, quiet. He thought of the Foundation Gala, the speeches about maternal health, the jazz quartet hired to make compassion sound rich. He thought of this moment in a hospital room, two women giving each other dignity without a budget. Vega returned with updates. Sloane had lawyered up, but Evan's statement made the cage tight. The DA planned to charge Sloane with conspiracy and unlawful restraint, Evan with kidnapping and accessory. Blackline Protective's contract would be audited into oblivion. The storage unit logs, the camera outage, the GPS core, all of it formed a map that led to a very mortal culprit. Choice. Choice looks glamorous in TED Talks, Vega said. In case files, it's usually a receipt. When she left, Alison sat on the edge of Gladys's bed. "Come stay with me a while," she said. "The baby's room can be my second bedroom. We'll eat cheap cereal and watch reruns where people tell the truth in 22 minutes. Gladys smiled. "Deal." Graham stood. "I'll send your things." "I said stay with me," Alison told Gladys, not looking at him. Then, softer. "You can visit." He nodded, acceding without any legal memo making his surrender look noble. "I'm going to resign," he said. "Hold a press conference. Tell the truth." "You're going to be sued," Alison said. "I deserve some of it." Gladys watched him and felt something she hadn't let herself feel in months. Compassion that wasn't a trap. Redemption wasn't a speech. It was a long, dumb road paved with days where you didn't choose yourself first. "Be better," she said, "even if no one claps." A week later, a podium waited in a room where men usually bragged. Cameras congregated, microphones tilted like hungry mouths. Graham walked out without a tie, that small unarmor intentional. He had not slept enough. He looked like a man who had been introduced to himself at last. "Good afternoon," he said. No legal counsel flanked him. Sloane had been arraigned that morning, her expression carved in a courtroom light that made everyone look more human than they intended. "I hired people who did harm," Graham said. "I made a culture that rewarded winning without asking how we won. I believed the story that if the company thrived, all sins blurred into strategy. That story is a lie. My wife, Gladys Bennett, did not run. She was forced. Under the supervision of my company's head of communications and a contractor, she was taken to a secondary location to compel her to sign a statement that never should have been drafted. This is the worst failure of my life, and while I did not order it, I created the weather where it happened. I am resigning effective immediately. I will cooperate fully with the investigation. I will donate my severance to the Jackson Street Women's Center and to legal defense funds for domestic violence survivors. I don't expect applause. I expect accountability." Questions flew. He answered only a few. How much did he know? Less than he should have. Why didn't he say kidnapping in the first hours? Because he had believed an old, comfortable story about women being fragile and leaving. "Will you and your wife reconcile?" a reporter asked, voice curious and hungry. "That is not a question for a podium," he said. "It's a question for a kitchen table." He left to a murmur that wasn't triumph and wasn't hatred. Something quieter. The market slouched and then adjusted around the hole where his name had been the brand. At Alison's apartment in Dorchester, Gladys watched with her feet up on an ottoman and a bowl of cereal balanced on her belly. Celine and Tasha sat on the couch with her like an improbable future. The baby rolled, as if applauding with tiny limbs. On the table lay a stack of community center flyers, a draft of a plan that looked more like purpose than optics. Prenatal classes, taught by nurses on their days off, a ride-share network to get women to appointments, a small grant fund for women who needed to leave now. A key turned in the lock. Alison walked in, carrying a bag of groceries and 3 cheap bouquets. "We're making our own gala," she announced, banging cabinets like cymbals. Gladys smiled, let herself lean back, and for the first time since the harbor fog, felt an oxygen that didn't have to justify itself. Later that night, the doorbell rang. Graham stood on the stoop, holding a lasagna like an apology. "You made that?" Alison asked skeptically. "I assembled it," he said. "The butcher took pity on me." Gladys stepped into the hallway. "We have food," she said. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to show you. I'm learning how to be small. I'll leave it and go." She took the pan, warm through the towel. "Stay for a plate," she said, surprising herself. "Eat at the coffee table and don't talk like a press release." He smiled, not relieved exactly. Gratitude had muscle now. Okay. They ate, They talked about shows that ended badly and recipes that didn't. They didn't mention Sloane. They didn't say redemption. They washed dishes in a sink with water too hot and laughed when the soap made Mount Suds. When Graham left, he looked at Gladys the way people look at the ocean. They know it could be deadly, and they know it could save them, and they step back anyway out of respect. In bed, Gladys put a hand on her stomach. The baby rolled, a moon under skin. She whispered to the dark, to the future, to the long road of days. We get to start over every morning. Gladys didn't go back to the brownstone. She and Alison painted the second bedroom a quiet green and built the crib without a wait list. Graham sold his company shares to fund a trust that couldn't be rebranded. He testified. He learned how to sit in a hard plastic chair in a church basement and listen without fixing. Sloane pled to a reduced charge and gave speeches in a prison classroom about the soft, expensive lies she had believed. Evan wrote letters to his daughter, who answered with drawings of trees that looked like lungs. When Gladys went into labor in April, the room wasn't curated. It was bright and ordinary and holy. She named the baby May. At home, she held May while Alison read out loud from paperbacks Celine brought by. At the window, the city moved, complicated and alive. Gladys felt the weight of one life, and it was enough. If stories like this speak to you, resilience, dignity, justice, second chances, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going. Robert Kemp had everything a man could dream of. A billion-dollar empire, a penthouse that scraped the New York skyline, and a wife whose beauty was the envy of his circle. But from his sterile glass office, 30 floors above the city, he watched the storm clouds gather, an ominous mirror to the tempest brewing in his own home. He had become a ghost in his marriage, haunted by ambition and a secret that lived on his phone under a different name. He believed he had all the time in the world to fix it, to choose his wife, Rachel, and their unborn child. But that night, as the rain lashed against the windows and he saw her frail figure collapse on the slick pavement below, he realized time had just run out. He thought the tragedy was the storm, the collapse, the betrayal. He was wrong. The real storm was what she did next. The penthouse felt less like a home and more like a museum exhibit on wealth. It was all clean lines, Italian marble, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a god's-eye view of Manhattan. Robert Kemp stood before one of these windows, not admiring the view, but watching his own reflection superimposed over the sprawling city lights. He saw the sharp cut of his Tom Ford suit, the glint of his Patek Philippe watch, and the weary set of his jaw. He was the king of this kingdom, but the crown felt heavier than it ever had. Behind him, Rachel moved through the cavernous living room like a whisper. She used to fill this space with laughter and the scent of the oil paints she loved. Now, her presence was almost apologetic. He heard the soft clink of a ceramic mug on the granite countertop. "Robert, I made some chamomile tea," she said, her voice soft, trying to find a crack in the wall of his focus. "Thanks, Lena," he murmured, his eyes still locked on the phone in his hand. The numbers on the screen represented the final push for the Aperture Tech acquisition, a deal that would cement his legacy, a deal worth more than most small countries. It was all he could think about. She drifted closer, her hand resting tentatively on his arm. He flinched, almost imperceptibly, a reaction born of a guilt so profound it had become a part of his physical wiring. He'd been working late for months. Working was the official term. Isabel Moreau, the brilliant and ruthless head of his European division, was the unofficial one. Their relationship was a transaction of ambition and convenience. a sterile affair that took place in 5-star hotels and private jets. A world away from this home he was slowly poisoning. "You seem so far away," Rachel said, her thumb stroking the sleeve of his suit. "Is everything okay with the deal?" "It's the final stretch. High stakes. You know how it is," he said, the excuse tasting like ash in his mouth. He finally turned to her, really looking at her for the first time all evening. Her normally vibrant face was pale, and there were faint, lavender shadows under her kind, brown eyes. She was wearing one of his old, oversized cashmere sweaters, and it only emphasized her fragility. He felt a pang of something, not just guilt, but a deep, aching loss for the man he used to be with her. The man who would have dropped everything to listen. "I have something to tell you," she said, a nervous energy fluttering in her voice. "Something that might help. Ground us again." He forced a smile, pocketing his phone. "I'm all ears." She took a deep breath and led him to the sofa, her hands trembling slightly as she held his. "We've been talking about it for so long, about when the right time would be. With your work being so crazy, I know it's never seemed perfect. But maybe this is what makes it perfect." She was rambling, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "What now?" She placed his hand on her flat stomach. The cashmere was soft beneath his palm. "Robert," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." The words hit him like a physical blow. A baby, a child, a life that would bind him to this home, to this woman, forever. A decade ago, this would have been his ultimate dream. He and Rachel building a family in the city they loved. But now it felt like a complication, another variable in an equation he could no longer control. His mind wasn't on a nursery. It was on hostile takeovers, and Isabel's sharp, strategic mind that mirrored his own. He looked at Rachel's hopeful face, at the pure, unadulterated joy in her eyes, and the lie was already forming on his lips. "Lena, that's amazing news." He pulled her into a hug, the gesture stiff and unnatural. He was holding his wife, the mother of his child, but his mind was across the ocean, in a different city, with a different woman. As he held her, he felt the vibration of his phone in his pocket. A text message. He knew exactly who it was from. And in that moment, holding his pregnant wife, Robert Kemp knew he was a fraud of the highest order. The days that followed Rachel's announcement were a masterclass in deception. Robert played the part of the expectant father with chilling precision. He accompanied her to the first doctor's appointment, watching the grainy, pulsing image on the ultrasound screen with feigned awe. He held her hand, squeezed it at the right moments, and said all the right things. "A heartbeat," he'd whispered, his voice thick with a performance that deserved an award. "Our baby's heartbeat." But his heart wasn't in that sterile, hopeful room. It was in encrypted emails and hushed late-night calls. The Aperture Tech deal was entering its most volatile phase. Isabel was his general on the front lines in London, and their communication was constant, a blend of corporate strategy and the clipped, intimate shorthand of their affair. "The board is wavering, Robert. We need a show of force." Isabel's voice would crackle through his high-tech earpiece as he stared out at the city, Rachel sleeping peacefully in their bed, just a room away. "I'll be there Monday," he'd promised, the lie slipping out easily. He'd tell Rachel it was a last-minute emergency board meeting, a fire he had to put out in person. She was always so understanding. Too understanding. Her trust was a knife he twisted in his own gut with every lie he told. Rachel, meanwhile, tried to build a nest in their cold, modern penthouse. She brought home books on parenting, fabric swatches for a nursery, and organic prenatal vitamins that sat accusingly on the kitchen counter. She was trying to build a bridge back to him, brick by hopeful brick, and he was letting her do it, knowing a tidal wave was coming. The storm, both literal and metaphorical, began on a Thursday night. A fierce nor'easter was barreling toward the city, and the sky had been a bruised purple all day. Robert was on a conference call in his home office, the door shut but not quite latched. It was a tense negotiation with Aperture's primary shareholders, and Isabel was on the line from London, her voice sharp and commanding. "They're trying to leverage the media against us, Robert. We need to kill that narrative before it gets legs," Isabel said, her French accent sharpening with urgency. "I'll have my PR team draft a statement immediately," Robert replied, pacing the length of the office. "No, it needs to come from you. A personal touch," she insisted. "You'll be here Monday. We can strategize over dinner Sunday night. Just us." There was an intimacy in her tone that was more than professional. A shared history of battles, won in the boardroom and celebrated in the bedroom. "I miss you," she added, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Meant only for him. He didn't respond to that part, acutely aware of the paper-thin walls of his life. But it was too late. Rachel had been walking past the office, a plate of sliced apples in her hand, a peace offering for his stressful day. She'd heard Isabel's voice, a voice she recognized from company galas and shareholder reports. But it was the tone that made her freeze, the possessiveness, the familiarity. "I miss you." The three simple words landed like stones, shattering the fragile glass of her denial. She pushed the door open slightly. Robert stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the window where lightning was beginning to fork across the sky. He was completely absorbed, a different man from the one who had smiled at the ultrasound. This was the real Robert, the one she had been losing for months. He ended the call and turned, finally noticing her in the doorway. The plate of apples slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. "Lena?" he asked, his face a mask of concern, but his eyes, for a split second, flashed with the panic of being caught. "Who is Isabel Moreau to you, Robert?" she asked, her voice quiet and dangerously steady. It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple, devastating question. "She's my colleague, head of the European division. You know that," he said, taking a step toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Don't," she warned, holding up a hand. The first tear escaped, tracing a path down her pale cheek. "Don't lie to me." I heard her. The way she spoke to you, the air crackled with a tension that rivaled the storm outside. The first fat drops of rain began to splatter against the windows, like accusations being thrown from the heavens. He could see the dawning, horrific realization in her eyes. The later nights, the sudden trips, the emotional distance, all the scattered pieces were clicking into place for her, forming a picture of betrayal so ugly it stole her breath. "Rachel, it's not what you think," he began, the most pathetic and predictable of all clichés. "Isn't it?" she whispered, her gaze dropping to her stomach, her hand instinctively moving to shield the tiny, innocent life within. "Or is it exactly what I think? The shattered plate on the floor was a prelude. The real explosion came next. Rachel's quiet devastation erupted into a storm of grief and rage that had been brewing for months. All this time," she choked out, her voice raw. "All those late nights you were closing a deal. All those trips to put out fires. Was she the fire, Robert? Was our marriage the thing you were trying to escape?" Robert felt the walls of his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Every lie, every evasion was being laid bare under the harsh light of her pain. "Rachel, it's complicated. The business—" "Don't you dare hide behind your business!" she shrieked, the sound foreign and terrifying coming from her. "This isn't about business. This is about us. This is about you looking me in the eye at our first ultrasound and telling me you loved me while you were sleeping with another woman." The rain was a torrential downpour now, hammering against the windows in furious, percussive blasts. The wind howled, a symphony for their marital collapse. "It wasn't like that," he insisted, his voice rising. It was a mistake, a symptom of the pressure I've been under." "A mistake?" she repeated, a hollow, bitter laugh escaping her lips. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is not setting the alarm. This is a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to betray our child before it's even born." Her words were daggers, each one finding its mark. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, to somehow absorb her pain, but he knew he was the source of it. He was the poison. His phone buzzed on the desk. A text. Then another. It was Isabel. "The shareholders are calling an emergency virtual meeting. Midnight London time. You need to be on this call, Robert. This is it." Midnight in London was 7 p.m. in New York. Right now. He glanced at his phone, a flicker of instinct, and Rachel saw it. Her eyes, red-rimmed and filled with tears, narrowed with a new, colder fury. "Of course," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a chilling resignation. "Even now, she's more important. The deal is more important." "Lena, that's not true," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was torn. The call was the culmination of 2 years of work, his legacy, his empire. But his wife, his pregnant wife, was falling apart in front of him. "I need some air," she said numbly, turning and walking toward the door, her movements robotic. "Air! Rachel, look outside! There's a hurricane out there!" he yelled, panicked. "Where are you going?" "Away from you," she said, her voice flat. She pulled on a thin raincoat, her hands shaking too much to properly button it. I can't breathe in here anymore. I can't breathe the same air as you." She pulled the heavy door open and stepped out into the hallway. He started to go after her, but his phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was his COO. "Robert, you need to get on the line now. They're threatening to walk." He was frozen in a moment of impossible choice. His entire professional life on one line, his entire personal life walking out the door. In a moment of catastrophic misjudgment, driven by the adrenaline of the deal, he chose the call. "I'll just stabilize this. Then I'll go after her," he told himself. "She'll just go down to the lobby and cool off." He answered the call, his voice a strained, false calm. "I'm here. Let's handle this." He walked back to the window of his office as he talked, his words about market caps and shareholder value a meaningless drone in his ears. He scanned the street below, searching for her. And then he saw her. Rachel hadn't gone to the lobby. She had walked out onto the street, into the full fury of the storm. The wind whipped her raincoat around her, and the rain plastered her hair to her face. She looked small and lost, a solitary figure in the chaos of the weather. She took a few unsteady steps, then swayed. From 30 floors up, it was like watching a silent movie. He saw her hand go to her stomach. He saw her knees buckle. He saw her collapse onto the wet, glistening pavement. A fallen leaf in a raging river. "No," he breathed into the phone. The voices of the shareholders faded into a dull roar. The billion-dollar deal vanished. The only thing in the world was the image of his wife, his pregnant wife, lying motionless in the middle of a storm he had created. He dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the voices still chattering from the speaker. He didn't hear them. He was already running, his heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against his ribs. He had made his choice. and it was the wrong one. The elevator ride down felt like an eternity. Robert jabbed the lobby button repeatedly, his mind a maelstrom of panic and regret. The calm, calculating CEO was gone, replaced by a terrified husband. He burst out of the building's grand entrance, the doorman shouting after him, and ran into the deluge. The rain was cold and stinging, soaking his suit in seconds. He saw her immediately, a small heap on the dark, rain-slicked asphalt. A taxi swerved violently to avoid her. "Rachel!" he screamed, his voice swallowed by the wind. He reached her side, dropping to his knees on the pavement. Her face was terrifyingly pale, her eyes closed. He felt for a pulse in her neck, his fingers clumsy and shaking. It was there. Faint, but there. "Somebody help!" he roared at the indifferent city. "Call 911. He gently cradled her head, trying to shield her from the worst of the rain with his own body. "Lena, I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words a useless, pathetic mantra. "Please wake up. Please be okay." The wail of a siren cut through the storm's howl. Paramedics were there within minutes, their movements efficient and urgent. They loaded Rachel onto a stretcher, her face stark white against the red canvas. Robert tried to climb into the ambulance with her, but a paramedic held him back. "Sir, we need room to work. Follow us to Lenox Hill Hospital." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and it sped away, its lights painting streaks of red and white on the wet streets. Robert was left standing alone in the storm, dripping and broken. For the first time, he felt the true weight of his actions. This wasn't a negotiation he could win or a problem he could throw money at. This was a consequence, real and terrifying. At the hospital, the minutes bled into hours. He sat in a sterile, beige waiting room, the smell of antiseptic burning his nostrils. He had called her emergency contact, her best friend Clara, who arrived looking like a storm cloud herself, her eyes shooting daggers of pure hatred at him. "What did you do to her?" Clara demanded, her voice low and venomous. Robert started, but no words came. What could he say? "I broke her heart and she collapsed from the stress. I prioritized a business deal over my pregnant wife." Finally, a doctor appeared. "Mr. Vance?" Robert shot to his feet. "Is she okay? Is the baby okay?" "Your wife is stable," the doctor said, his expression grim. "She suffered from a vasovagal syncope episode, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure, likely brought on by extreme emotional distress. It caused her to faint. We're keeping her overnight for observation. The baby's heartbeat is stable for now, but this was a significant shock to her system. She needs to avoid all forms of stress." The doctor's gaze was pointed, leaving no doubt who he considered the primary source of that stress. The relief that washed over Robert was so immense, his legs nearly gave out. But it was short-lived, replaced by a new wave of dread. Rachel was awake. She was asking to see Clara, not him. He waited another hour before Clara emerged, her face softened slightly with pity. "She'll see you now. Be gentle, Robert. For God's sake, just be gentle." He walked into the private room on trembling legs. Rachel was sitting up in bed, looking impossibly small against the white pillows. An IV was taped to her hand. She looked exhausted, fragile, but as he met her gaze, he saw something new in her eyes. The hurt was still there, but it was overshadowed by a calm, unbreakable resolve. The fire of her anger had burned out, leaving behind something harder, like tempered steel. "Lena, he started, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry. I can't tell you how sorry I am." She held up a hand, stopping him. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, devoid of the emotion from before. It was that very lack of emotion that terrified him. "I've had a lot of time to think, lying here," she said, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall just past his shoulder. About us. About this baby. "We can fix this," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I'll cancel the trip. I'll sell the company. I don't care. I'll do anything." "No, you won't," she said simply. "Because this isn't about one deal or one trip, Robert. It's about who you are. Your ambition is a hunger that will never be full. I thought I could be enough. I thought this baby would be enough. But we'll always just be an inconvenient distraction from your real love." "That's not true." She finally looked at him, and the coldness in her eyes chilled him to the bone. This was her stunning move. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a demand, it was a declaration. "It's over, Robert," she said. The words were delivered without malice, as a simple statement of fact. "I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to scream anymore. I'm just done. I'm filing for divorce." He stared at her, speechless. He had expected tears, ultimatums, a chance to bargain. He had not expected this quiet, final severance. "I will not raise my child in a house filled with lies and ghosts," she continued, her hand resting on her stomach. "This baby deserves a mother who isn't waiting by the window for a husband who will never truly come home. So you can have your empire. You can have your deal. You can have Isabel. I am taking my child, and I am building a life, a real one, somewhere else." She had taken the biggest crisis of their lives, the moment of her greatest vulnerability, and found in it a strength he had never seen. She wasn't a victim collapsing in the storm. She was a survivor walking out of the wreckage, and she was leaving him behind. Robert returned to the penthouse the next morning. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city scrubbed clean and glistening under a pale, watery sun. But inside his home, the storm raged on. The silence was the first thing that hit him. It was a physical presence, vast and suffocating. The air was still, heavy with the echoes of last night's fight. The shattered apple plate had been cleaned up by the overnight staff, but the ghost of it remained. Rachel was gone. He walked through the rooms, a trespasser in his own life. Half the clothes in her closet were missing. Her favorite books were gone from the nightstand. The small wooden easel she kept in the corner of the living room, which she hadn't used in years but refused to part with, was gone. The only thing she'd left behind was a single, framed photo on his bedside table, a picture of them from their honeymoon in Italy, young and ridiculously happy, their faces lit by the Tuscan sun. It was a cruel reminder of the man he'd once been. His phone, which he'd retrieved from his office, buzzed with notifications, emails of congratulations, texts from his board. The Aperture Tech deal had closed in the early hours of the morning. His gambit had paid off. He was now, by all metrics, more powerful and successful than ever. The deal of a lifetime was done. He stared at the email from his COO, the subject line in all caps. "We did it!" He felt nothing. The triumphant thrill he had chased for 2 years was completely absent. The victory was hollow, a feast of ashes. He had won the world and lost his soul. The days turned into a week, then 2. Robert moved through his life like an automaton. He went to meetings, made decisions, and managed his empire with the same ruthless efficiency as always. But it was a performance. Inside, he was spiraling. He'd try to call Rachel, but the calls went straight to voicemail. His texts, increasingly desperate pleas for a conversation, remained unanswered, a string of stark blue bubbles with no reply. She had blocked him completely. He sent flowers to Clara's apartment, where he assumed Rachel was staying. They were returned the next day with a curt note. "She doesn't want them." He had his lawyer reach out to her, and the response came back through her own attorney, a woman with a reputation for being a shark. The message was cold and clear. All communication would be through legal channels. The divorce papers were being drawn up. The penthouse became his prison. Every object mocked him. He saw Rachel in the curve of the sofa where she used to read, in the kitchen where she'd tried to teach him how to cook, in the empty space beside him, in their sprawling bed. He stopped sleeping, haunted by the image of her collapsing in the rain. He'd wake up in a cold sweat, his heart hammering, the sound of the ambulance siren echoing in the silent room. One night, drowning in whiskey and self-loathing, he found a box in the back of a storage closet. It was filled with Rachel's old sketchbooks. He sat on the floor and flipped through them. There were charcoal sketches of the city, watercolors of flowers, and countless portraits of him. Early in their relationship, she had drawn him constantly. Robert laughing, Robert sleeping, Robert staring thoughtfully into the distance. She had seen him, really seen him, with an artist's eye and a lover's heart. The last drawing in the final book was from a year ago. It was a sketch of his back as he sat at his desk, his face illuminated only by the glow of his laptop. The drawing was stark, lonely, and unfinished. She had stopped seeing his face and only saw his back. She had seen him turning away long before he had. The realization was a gut punch. This wasn't a sudden implosion. It was a slow, creeping decay he had been too blind and too arrogant to notice. His ambition hadn't just been a distraction. It had been an eraser, slowly wiping away the color and life from their marriage until only a faint, sad outline was left. He finally called Isabel. She answered, her voice bright and victorious. "Robert, I was wondering when you'd call to celebrate. I've booked our usual spot at Le Bernardin for tonight." He stood up, the sketchbook still in his hand, and walked to the window overlooking the city he had conquered. "It's over, Isabel," he said, his voice flat and dead. There was a pause. "The deal is done, Robert. What's over?" "Us," he clarified. "This, whatever it was. It's over." It was a mistake. He could hear her sharp intake of breath, the surprise and indignation, but he didn't care. He ended the call before she could reply, tossing the phone onto the sofa. Ending it with Isabel wasn't a solution. It was just one small, pathetic step on a long, dark road of atonement. He had to fix himself before he could even begin to ask for a chance to be a father to his child. The silence of the penthouse pressed in, and for the first time, Robert Kemp began to listen. While Robert was rattling around in his gilded cage, Rachel was starting over in a small, second-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn that belonged to her friend, Clara. The place was cluttered with books, half-finished canvases, and the comforting scent of coffee and turpentine. It was a world away from the sterile perfection of the penthouse, and for the first time in a long time, Rachel could breathe. The first week was a blur of exhaustion and grief. She slept, cried, and ate the simple, nourishing meals Clara put in front of her. She felt hollowed out, a fragile shell of the woman she used to be. The trauma of the collapse and the subsequent hospital stay had left her physically weak, and the doctor's warning to avoid stress felt like a cruel joke. Her entire life was stress, but as her physical strength slowly returned, something else began to stir within her. A flicker of the old Rachel, the artist, the woman who existed before she became Mrs. Robert Kemp. One afternoon, Clara came home from her job as a gallery curator to find Rachel staring at a blank canvas that had been leaning against the wall. "I haven't painted in 3 years," Rachel said softly, her hand hovering over the pristine white surface. "Robert, he said the fumes weren't good for the penthouse's air filtration system." Clara snorted. "Robert wouldn't know a real thing if it hit him in his custom-tailored suit. The only thing he filters is his conscience." She put a comforting hand on Rachel's shoulder. "Maybe it's time to make a mess." That evening, Rachel picked up a piece of charcoal. Her hand felt clumsy at first, the muscle memory buried under years of disuse. But then she began to draw. She didn't think. She just let the emotions flow out of her fingertips and onto the canvas. She drew the storm, not the literal one, but the emotional tempest that had been her life. Dark, swirling lines, flashes of jagged white, and at the center, a small, protected space, a calm eye in the hurricane. It was raw, chaotic, and deeply honest. For the next few months, painting became her therapy and her salvation. She poured all her pain, her anger, and her burgeoning hope into her work. The canvases piled up in the small apartment, abstract explorations of betrayal, portraits of strength emerging from sorrow, and vibrant, hopeful landscapes that represented the future she was determined to build for her child. She was no longer just the millionaire's discarded wife. She was an artist, reclaiming her voice, brushstroke by brushstroke. Her belly grew, a constant, gentle reminder of the new life she was protecting. She talked to the baby constantly, promising it a world filled with color, love, and honesty. This child would not be raised in the shadow of a glass tower, defined by its father's wealth. This child would be raised in the light. Her lawyer, a formidable woman named Margaret, handled the divorce proceedings with brutal efficiency. Robert's first offer was, predictably, a monetary one. A settlement so large it was obscene, a trust fund for the baby that would ensure it never wanted for anything. Rachel's response, delivered through Margaret, was swift and unequivocal. "I don't want his money. I want his accountability." She wasn't going to be bought off. She would accept child support, as was the baby's right, but she refused any personal alimony. She would make her own way. Her demands were not financial. They were personal. She wanted a clear, legally binding co-parenting plan. She wanted Robert to attend parenting classes. She wanted him to undergo therapy to deal with his work addiction and narcissism. She wasn't trying to punish him. She was trying to ensure that their child would have a father who was present, not just a benefactor who was absent. Margaret was stunned. "In 20 years of divorce law, I've never had a client turn down a settlement like that," she told Rachel over the phone. "You're either crazy or the strongest woman I've ever met." "I'm a mother," Rachel replied simply. "My child's well-being is not for sale." Her strength wasn't loud or aggressive. It was a quiet, deep-rooted power that had grown in the ruins of her old life. She was building a new foundation, not with marble and steel, but with paint, courage, and a fierce, protective love for the baby growing inside her. She was terrified, yes, but for the first time in years, she felt truly, authentically alive. She was no longer a reflection of Robert's success. She was the creator of her own. The meeting took place in a neutral, sterile conference room at a mediation firm in Midtown. It was the first time Robert and Rachel had been in the same room in 4 months. The air was thick with unspoken words and the formal presence of their lawyers. Robert saw her the moment she walked in. Pregnancy suited her. It had softened the sharp edges of her grief, replacing them with a quiet, powerful glow. She carried herself with a newfound confidence that was both beautiful and intimidating. She met his gaze for a brief second, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention to her lawyer, Margaret. The dismissal was more painful than any angry tirade. Robert had spent the last 4 months in his own personal hell. He had done what she'd asked. He'd found a therapist, a no-nonsense psychiatrist who specialized in high-powered executives with personality disorders. The sessions were brutal, forcing Robert to confront the empty, validation-seeking void that drove him. He had also enrolled in a parenting class in a community center downtown, sitting awkwardly in a circle of plastic chairs with a dozen other expectant couples, learning how to swaddle a doll and change a diaper. He was the only one there alone. He was changing, but he knew it was just a start. He wasn't doing it to win her back. He knew that bridge had been burned. He was doing it for the child. He was doing it so he could one day look his son or daughter in the eye and not see a reflection of his own failures. "Mr. Vance," Margaret began, her voice crisp and businesslike, "my client has reviewed your initial proposal. While she appreciates the financial provisions for the child, she finds them insufficient in other areas." Robert's lawyer, a slick corporate litigator named Arthur, shifted in his seat. "Insufficient? The trust is ironclad. The child will be set for life." Rachel spoke for the first time, her voice calm and steady. "My child already is set for life, Arthur. It will have a mother who loves it unconditionally. What is in question is whether it will have a father." The words hung in the air. Robert felt his cheeks burn with shame. "Rachel is proposing a detailed co-parenting agreement," Margaret continued, sliding a thick document across the polished table. "It outlines visitation schedules, holiday arrangements, and decisions regarding education and healthcare. It also includes several stipulations." Arthur picked up the document and began to read, his eyebrows rising higher with every page. "Mandatory therapy sessions for Mr. Vance to continue for a minimum of 2 years. Completion of 3 separate parenting courses. A probationary period of supervised visitation for the first 6 months. This is unorthodox." "This is non-negotiable," Rachel said firmly. Robert didn't even look at the document. He looked at Rachel. "I'll do it," he said, his voice quiet but clear. Arthur turned to him, astonished. "Robert, let's discuss this. Some of these clauses could be seen as punitive." "They're not punitive, Arthur. They're prudent," Robert said, never taking his eyes off Rachel. "She's right. I haven't earned the right to be called a father yet. I need to show that I can be one." He turned his full attention to his estranged wife. "I'll sign it. I'll do all of it, Rachel, and more. Whatever it takes." For the first time, a flicker of surprise registered in her eyes. She had expected a fight, a negotiation, another example of him trying to leverage his power. She had not expected this quiet, immediate capitulation. "The agreement also states," Margaret added, pressing on, "that you are not to have overnight contact with Isabel Morrow or any other romantic partner during your parenting time for the first 5 years. This was the final test, a direct shot at the source of the betrayal. Isabel and I are no longer associated, personally or professionally," Robert stated, his voice even. "She resigned from the company 2 months ago. That clause will not be an issue." The room fell silent. Rachel stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time since that horrible night. She saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also a glimmer of something she hadn't seen in years. Sincerity. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. He was simply agreeing. "Very well," Margaret said, closing her folder. "We'll have the final documents drawn up for your signature." As they all stood to leave, Robert spoke again. "Rachel, wait." She paused at the door, her back to him. "The nursery," he said, his voice catching slightly. I had it finished, the way you wanted, with the mural of the stars on the ceiling you showed me a picture of. If you ever need anything from the apartment, or if you just want to see it, it's there. For the baby." She didn't turn around, but she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture. Then she walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of the room, having just signed away his power and taken the first, terrifying step toward earning back his humanity. 5 months later, in the dead of a cold January night, Robert's phone rang. He had been dozing in a chair in his silent, cavernous living room, a book about infant sleep patterns lying open on his chest. He grabbed the phone, his heart instantly hammering. The caller ID read, Clara. "Robert, it's time." Clara's voice was tense but steady. "Her water broke an hour ago. We're at Lenox Hill." "I'm on my way," he said, already on his feet, pulling on the shoes he'd left by the door for this exact moment. He had a bag packed in his car, not for him, but for Rachel, filled with the snacks, comfortable socks and coconut water her birth plan had specified. He had memorized the entire document. This was the moment his therapy and parenting classes had been leading up to. His therapist's voice echoed in his head. "Your role is not to demand, but to support. You are not the protagonist of this story, Robert. You are a supporting actor. Show up, be quiet, and do whatever she asks of you." He broke every speed limit getting to the hospital, his mind a silent prayer. Let her be okay. Let the baby be okay. He found Clara in the waiting room of the maternity ward, pacing a hole in the linoleum floor. "How is she?" he asked, breathless. "She's a warrior," Clara said, her eyes red-rimmed. "The contractions are getting intense. She's in the room at the end of the hall, room 612. Did she ask for me?" Robert asked, his hope fragile. Clara gave him a look that was a mixture of pity and exasperation. "No, Robert. She's a little busy right now, but she didn't say you couldn't be here. That's your olive branch. Don't mess it up." He nodded, understanding. He walked to the end of the hall and stood outside room 612. Through the small window in the door, he could see Rachel. Her face was contorted in pain, her hands gripping the bed rails. A nurse was coaching her through a contraction. His first instinct was to burst in, to hold her hand, to tell her she could do it, but he stopped himself. That was what the old Robert would have done. Made the moment about him, about his need to be the hero. The new Robert understood. This was her space, her battle. He was here to offer support, not to invade. So he waited. He sat on the hard plastic chair outside her door and waited. For hours. He listened to her pained cries and the calm, encouraging murmurs of the nurses and Clara. He fielded calls from his office, telling his assistant to cancel his entire week. "It's a family emergency," he said, and for the first time the words felt true. His family was in that room, and his empire could burn to the ground for all he cared. A nurse on her break saw him sitting there, his expensive suit rumpled, his face etched with worry. "You the father?" she asked kindly. "I'm trying to be," he answered honestly. "She's strong," the nurse said with a smile. "You've got a fighter in there." After what felt like a lifetime, a new sound cut through the air. Not a cry of pain, but a cry of life. The thin, mighty wail of a newborn baby. Tears streamed down Robert's face. He buried his head in his hands, overcome with a wave of emotion so powerful it buckled him. Relief, joy, and a profound, bottomless love for a person he hadn't even met yet. He stayed where he was, giving them their time. 10 minutes later, the door opened. It was Clara, her face beaming and tear-streaked. "It's a girl, Robert," she whispered. "She's perfect. Rachel's asking for you." He stood up, his legs shaking, and walked into the room. The scent of new life was in the air. Rachel was propped up against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, looking more beautiful and exhausted than he had ever seen her, and in her arms, wrapped in a pink and white striped blanket, was a tiny, perfect baby with a tuft of dark hair. He approached the bed slowly, reverently. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man, humbled and broken and remade, standing in the presence of a miracle he had almost thrown away. The hospital room felt like a sacred space. The chaotic energy of labor had been replaced by a deep, peaceful quiet, punctuated only by the soft, snuffly sounds of the baby. Robert stood by the bed, his hands clasped behind his back, feeling like an intruder on a holy scene. Rachel looked up at him, her eyes weary but clear. The anger and resentment that had been a wall between them for so long seemed to have dissolved, washed away by the tidal wave of childbirth. In its place was a shared vulnerability. "She's beautiful, Lena," he whispered, his voice thick. "She looks like you," Rachel said softly, a faint smile touching her lips as she looked down at the baby's face. Poor thing. It was a joke, a tiny sliver of their old rapport, and it felt like a gift, a small measure of grace. Do you want to hold her?" Rachel asked, her voice gentle. Robert's breath caught in his throat. He just nodded, unable to speak. He washed his hands at the sink, the motions slow and deliberate, then sat on the edge of the chair beside her bed. Rachel carefully, expertly, transferred the warm, precious bundle into his arms. The baby was so light, so impossibly small. She squirmed and made a little noise, her tiny, wrinkled face bunching up. Her eyes were closed, her eyelashes fine as silk. Robert stared at her, completely mesmerized. This was his daughter, a real, living, breathing piece of his heart, now existing outside of his body. He felt the weight of his failures, the selfishness of his ambition, the cruelty of his betrayal, all crashing down on him. But as he looked at this perfect, innocent life, he also felt a powerful, cleansing wave of purpose. This was his chance to atone, not with words or money, but with a lifetime of devotion. Have you thought of a name?" he asked, his gaze never leaving his daughter's face. "I was thinking, Lily," Rachel said, "for new beginnings, for purity." "Lily," Robert repeated. "Lily Vance. It's perfect." He looked up at Rachel, his eyes swimming with tears. "Thank you, Rachel, for this gift. For not shutting me out completely." "She deserves a father," Rachel said, her voice tired but firm. "Whether you deserve to be one is up to you to prove from this moment on." There was no magical forgiveness in her words, no promise of a reconciled future. It was a statement of fact, a challenge, and it was a challenge he was ready to spend the rest of his life meeting. He spent the next hour just holding Lily, studying every detail of her face, letting her tiny fingers curl around his thumb. He and Rachel didn't talk much. They didn't need to. They were no longer husband and wife, but they were now linked in the most profound way possible. They were parents, co-creators of this new life. When a nurse came in to check on Rachel, Robert carefully handed Lily back to her mother. As he stood up to leave, to give them space, he paused. "I meant what I said, Lena," he said quietly, "about doing whatever it takes. I know I broke our life, but I will not fail this one. I will not fail her." Rachel simply nodded, her eyes on the beautiful baby in her arms. He walked out of the hospital into the crisp, pre-dawn air. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, painting the city in shades of soft pink and grey. The world felt new. The old Robert Kemp had died in that silent, lonely penthouse. The man who walked out of the hospital was someone different. He was Lily's father, and that was a title he was determined to earn. 2 years passed. Life did not snap back into a fairy tale. There was no grand romantic reunion. Instead, something quieter, more realistic, and ultimately more profound took root. A partnership. Robert kept his word. He was a constant, steady presence in Lily's life. He finished his parenting courses. He never missed a therapy session. He adhered to every clause of their co-parenting agreement with a devotion that surprised even his own lawyer. He learned to be a father not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday moments. He mastered the art of the diaper change, learned to distinguish the hungry cry from the tired cry, and could recite every word to Lily's favorite bedtime story, Good Night Moon. He downsized his life, selling the cold, cavernous penthouse and moving into a more modest, though still luxurious, brownstone in the West Village. It had a small backyard, which he filled with a swing set and a sandbox. He restructured his company, delegating more, traveling less, and making it a non-negotiable rule that he was unreachable between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. every night, Lily's bath time and bedtime. Rachel, free from the constraints of her old life, flourished. She had moved into her own apartment in Brooklyn, a sunny space with a large studio room. Her art, born from pain, had evolved. It became bolder, more vibrant. Her collection, which she titled The Storm and the Calm, was featured in Clara's gallery. It was a critical and commercial success. She was no longer Rachel Vance, the millionaire's wife. She was Rachel Hayes, an artist whose work spoke of resilience and rebirth. They co-parented with a quiet respect and efficiency that sometimes felt more like a business arrangement. But it was one built on a foundation of trust that Robert was painstakingly rebuilding. Their handoffs in a park halfway between their homes were polite, focused on Lily's schedule, her latest word, or a funny face she had learned to make. One bright, crisp Saturday afternoon in autumn, they met at that park. Lily, now a bubbly toddler with her father's intense eyes and her mother's warm smile, was taking her first truly confident steps. She toddled on unsteady legs across the grass, a look of fierce concentration on her face. Robert and Rachel sat on a bench, a comfortable distance between them, watching her. "Her daycare teacher says she's the most determined child in the class," Rachel said, a proud smile on her face. "When she wants something, she doesn't give up." "She gets that from her mother," Robert said, his gaze soft as he watched his daughter. He meant it. He had once mistaken Rachel's kindness for weakness. He now knew it was the bedrock of a strength he could only dream of possessing. Rachel looked at him, a genuine, unguarded warmth in her eyes. "She gets it from both of us." It was a small acknowledgement, but it felt monumental. A recognition that they were a team, that Lily was a perfect fusion of their best parts. Lily, having successfully navigated a treacherous patch of grass, stopped and looked back. She saw both her parents watching her. She grinned, a wide, toothy grin, and then, for the first time, she walked a straight line, right from the spot where she stood, across the space that separated them. She walked away from her mother and straight into the waiting, open arms of her father. Robert lifted her up, burying his face in her soft curls, his heart swelling with a love so pure and powerful it almost hurt. He looked over at Rachel, who was watching them, her face illuminated by the afternoon sun. Their old love story was over. The book closed forever. But as they sat there, two separate people bound by a shared love for their child, it felt like they were just beginning to write a new one. It wasn't a story of romance, but one of redemption, respect, and the quiet, enduring grace of a second chance. The canvas of their future was different than they had ever imagined, but it was, in its own way, beautiful. Robert and Rachel's journey shows us that sometimes the greatest tragedies can lead to the most profound transformations. Their story is a powerful reminder that it's never too late to change, and that true strength isn't about never falling, but about how we choose to get back up and rebuild. What did you think of Rachel's decision to leave and build her own life? Could you forgive Robert? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful, true-to-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart.